Hendrick's Homebrew. Okay, so as many of you may know, I happen to really like gin. Brian doesn't. But ever since we made the Juniper mead, the wheels have been cranking in my head and I've been thinking, oh man, I really like Hendrick's gin. Can we make a gin-like product? Because obviously it's not gin because we don't distill due to legalities. Please don't argue with us on this. We know. Check your rules. So what is the flavor notes in Hendrick's? Well, it's cucumber and rose with obviously a nice punch of juniper. So that's what we did. We made rose tea, cucumber water, and we got a big bunch of sugar in our fermenter. Now,
wow, that was the most specific ingredient list I've ever heard.
The sugar is there to ferment, so we're not really using this as a sweetener, more as a base for our yeasties to munch away on to make us some yummy, yummy alcohol. Ha! But we're using 3 pounds because we're using our little big mouth bubbler today because we have all this stuff going in here and we wanted to end up with as close to a gallon, a US gallon that is, of product, so we knew if we started a little bit beyond that, then hopefully we would get that amount at the end.
Because we do have a lot of things that are going to take up space. So if we had used a 1 gallon fermenter, we end up with less and less and less all the time.
So we've already measured out our 3 pounds of sugar in our fermenter. Everything has been sanitized in...
I'm not saying it.
The Red Book of Sanitization! Because sanitization is your friend when you are a homebrewer. The other thing that we did off camera is I made the cucumber water, and the way you make cucumber water is really easy. If you have access to English cucumbers, those are the cucumbers that you can find at the grocery store that are pre-wrapped in plastic.
And they're really long.
They're wrapped in plastic because their skins are really, really thin and delicate. That makes them super easy to make cucumber water because all you got to do is slice them thin. You don't even have to peel them or anything. So that's what we used. We used 1 whole English cucumber sliced really thin after we washed it good, of course, before slicing it. And then we are soaking that in water. Now you want to use a good quality water. We use our filtered water, not our RO water, just the filtered water, because we want to have no chlorine or weird sediment in that, because that's going to be most of our liquid that we're going to use for our fermentation. So I let that soak for at least an hour. You want to let the cucumber essence come into the water, otherwise you're not going to get any of the cucumber. We're opting to use the cucumber water rather than putting the cucumber directly into fermentation because we weren't sure exactly how that would affect our brew. The cucumber
mold fears.
Yeah, the cucumber slices, because they're such a moisture-rich environment, they could easily be places for mold to grow, and we really didn't want that to happen. So because in Hendrick's gin, the cucumber and rose are just light flavorants, we thought using rose tea and the cucumber water would be perfect in this instance.
The tea is made using 3/4 of an ounce of dried rose petals in some water. It's been soaking for probably about 10 minutes, and the exact quantity isn't important, but this is part of the reason why we're using the big mouth bubbler. We already had the cucumber water made, and I went, that's so close to a gallon. To just do a little bit wouldn't extract enough. So we went to the larger container. We'll start with a little bit more, and it's all good. But we are going to strain out the rose petals. I'll be right back with a strainer. All right, so as she said, we already have our 3 pounds of sugar in there, and this is still hot water, so the rose tea is gonna go in next. And I'm just pouring it through a sieve, keep the rose petals out. You can tell it already extracted, got a nice red color. Smells like roses.
So we're also gonna be adding juniper berries to this.
But I wanna get some of this sugar mixed up with that warm water.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of sugar in here. Melts easier when it's in warm liquid, so I don't want to make cool liquid, though there's not much liquid here. Next we have 2 ounces of juniper berries. Now I put these into my little hand blender attachment, so they've been ground up. It looks kind of like oatmeal at this point. Some of them are whole, some of them are ground up, but it's not a whole mess of berries. They're broken up a little bit, but it's not like a powder either. We're just gonna add that in.
The reason why Brian went ahead and bashed them around a bit is so that way there'd be an ease of extraction. There's more surface area for it to extract its juniper goodness into our brew.
When we did our juniper mead, we couldn't break them up for whatever reason that day. I didn't use the blender. And we didn't get as much extraction out of them. So I thought, let's break them up a little bit and see if we can get more. I'm gonna put the Fermentation in now because there's just no reason not to. That's just 2 grams with a little bit of water to mix it up. Time to add some of that cucumber water in here. Just filter it through the roses. Because if you don't get a good mix going, when you go to take a hydrometer reading, it's not going to be accurate at all. We use 3 pounds of sugar in this, which is a lot, but we should have a little bit over a gallon. So it should be slightly less than the astronomically high gravity that 3 pounds of sugar might be. Now that it's mixed up, it's time to take a reading. And by that I mean a specific gravity reading using a hydrometer. And I'm using Megamade to pull a sample. Insert your own joke here. We were just talking about the color of this. I think it's going to end up being kind of pink when it's finished. It's going to be a little bit on the pink side. It'll have a pinkish hue. All right, our starting gravity is going to be 1.108. Not too bad. I'll pour this right back in here because why waste it?
Last but not least is our yeast selection. Today we have chosen EC1118 because of that 3 pounds of sugar.
Yeah, I was afraid that we might end up with a higher concentration of sugars, but because we added more water, got a little bit less, but it's okay. This is a perfectly fine yeast. I used to have a problem with it, but I've actually found that it works really nice for a lot of wines and things, especially something that's like this, that's more of the herbal flavors and, you know, extraction type flavors. It's going to be very strongly flavored, so I think this works really well because it does take a little bit of the flavors out, so maybe it'll tone down that juniper a little bit and I'll be able to drink it. Joking, sort of. Don't forget to thwack your packet. By the way, Derica actually made a t-shirt of that. It's available in our store. She might even put a link in the bottom. Thwack your packet. What that means is there's all these little yeasts that stick in the bottom in the corners and stuff, so I just bang on it and get them all out. Before we put that lid on, I want to just shake this around a little bit and see if I can hydrate that yeast in there a touch without getting too much stuff stuck to the sides. I'm just kind of swirling it around a little bit. Didn't really work that well. Ooh, I'll use the whisk of unusually small size.
Now the trick that I do to these lids that you may or may have not caught there is that I go backwards a few times and that will level it out.
Yep.
And then you can just screw and screw and then you want to screw a little bit more.
Once you have the lid on, airlock and bung. They come with their own special bungs, which is a wonderful thing. I love that. This happens to be the little Big Mouth bubbler with the spigot, so it's the siphonless version. We found that it worked really, really well when we used it. You just end up with a little bit more waste if you're not really careful. In this case, not going to be a problem because we have that extra layer of flowers and juniper. Well, actually, no, it's just juniper, right? Yep. That will, you know, probably amass at the bottom. One thing you want to be careful of with this one, because there is floaters in there, things floating, you want to make sure you give it a little bit of a swirl, keep it wet, kind of like a fruit cap in a wine. You want to make sure that stays wet, otherwise mold will grow in there eventually. Just got to be careful with it and you'll be fine. Can you have put this in a bag? Yes. Would it have made it better? Better? Different. Might be a little bit harder to clean up this way, might actually be more likely to dry out and mold in a bag. So it all kind of balances out. I don't tend to use bags because why bother? It's just so much easier to just throw it in there and you have a little bit more cleanup later on. That's later. You don't have to worry about that today. Don't worry.
Another word of caution that you may or may not think of until it's too late and then you're really sad is that when you're using a fermenter with a spigot on it, you want to make sure that the spigot is in the closed position before you start filling it up. A good way to figure this out is when you're sanitizing in your sanitizing bucket, you can test it then because you're in the sanitizing bucket area and you'll know for certain if it's going to pour out or not.
That way you don't wear it on your lap. Not that I did that because she tested it ahead of time. Otherwise, I'd probably be wearing it. But anyway, what are we going to do with this now?
We're going to let it sit.
Actually, we're going to make a label. but I don't have the paper right in front of me for the label, so I'm gonna make the label off camera, but I put the date, I put the original gravity, and I put all the ingredients on that label. It sits on it, and that's it. We will be back with you in a few hours, a few days, whenever this kicks into fermentation to show you what it looks like.
All right, it is slowly but surely bubbling, as you saw by that bubble right there. So what does this mean? Well, this means that gas is being produced probably by fermentation in there, because where else would the gas be coming from? And it's pushing its way out through the airlock, doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let's take a closer look. So there's a bubble in the airlock, and you can see it's working just fine. If we move farther down into the liquid, you can see the juniper berries. They're all floating there on the top, and slightly underneath there, you can see that there's gas starting to build up, and the little bit of sediment that is within suspension is moving very slowly. This is what we call the lava lamp thing. I don't know. Effect, sure. And that's what you can see, the yeast starting to glob together, and they'll float up and float down, just like a lava lamp. So that's showing some fermentation. So now it's gonna sit, and we'll see you next time when it's ready to go.
As always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.
Bye-bye. So there's a bubble in the airlock, and you can see it's working just fine. If we move farther down into the liquid, you can see the juniper berries. They're all floating there on the top, and slightly underneath there, you can see that there's gas starting to build up, and the little bit of sediment that is within suspension is moving very slowly. This is what we call the lava lamp